Okay, so here are the answers, and now that we've talked a bit about the harmony in both major and minor, it's time for us to talk about intervals, because we're going to need that very soon. So, an interval is the distance between two notes, or two tones. We've talked about that a little bit when we said the distance from C to E is a major third. And we've also discussed the distance from C to E flat being a minor third, which I would notate as 3 or flat 3. This is how I notate those intervals. We also said, and we also talked about the perfect fifth, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's do all these smaller intervals first. So the second can be either major or minor as well. That's a major second or minor second, which I will notate as 2 or flat 2. Seems pretty consistent so far, but of course there's going to be an exception. Lastly, the distance from C to C. That's a prime, and we almost never really need that. I would just call it 1, but that's what it is. The 1 of a chord is called the root note. So, let's just put that here as well. It's not an interval name, it's more like a name for one specific note in a chord, the note upon which the chord is built, the note that sounds most resolved within that chord. But this is how we call it, root. And we're going to use this name a lot more often than that one. I wonder if we'll ever use this one again. Then, the distance from C to F. That's a perfect fourth. And from C to F sharp would be an augmented fourth, sharp fourth. And from C to G flat. Now G flat and F sharp are enharmonically the same. So I mean, it will be the same key on the piano, the same square on your guitar, or whatever it would be, the same note to sing for most applications. But the interval will be named differently, and we will get to why later on in the course. Diminished fifth. C to G would be a perfect fifth. So there's a discrepancy here. Like, why do we say major and minor in these cases, but we say perfect and augmented and diminished in these cases? There are rules for this. But first, I'll just finish the whole thing, and then I'll get back to you. I suggest you write it down, or take a screenshot and reference it later or something, because you will need to know what I'm talking about, or what I'm getting at when I use these numbers. So I said there was a rule for why we call some intervals major or minor, and why we call some perfect or augmented or diminished. So here's the thing, in classical music, we talked about consonance and dissonance. Consonant and dissonant. This sounding stable, and this sounds unstable. Or this sounds resolved, and this has tension. You could sort of see it like that. The consonants are 1, 4, 5, and 8. The prime or the root, the fourth, the fifth, and the octave. The dissonants are 2, 3, 6, and 7. Again, if you ever want to make it further in music theory, we will have some exceptions to this, but generally speaking, this is the basic categorization for these intervals. Now, a consonant is perfect. However, if you want to lower it or raise it, which we sometimes do, we will either say it's diminished or augmented. These intervals are the same in every major and minor scale. Every major and minor scale, at least until we get to jazz. Most major and minor scales will just have a 1, 4, 5, 8. The 2, 3, 6, and 7 make up a lot of the differences between major and minor. And there is no one that usually occurs in a scale. It's either the major one or the minor one. So there is no perfect, there is no common one. It's always one of two. If you were to go further than this, you could say diminished or augmented. So for example, the second, this is a D in the key of C. So the distance from C to D is a major second. The distance from C to D sharp is an augmented second. It's relatively rare, not as rare as you might want to believe, but it's relatively rare. And so usually we say minor or major. Usually we find minor and major intervals, but sometimes it's these. If you were to go beyond these two, you would say doubly diminished or doubly augmented, but that's rare. Okay, so that's everything in terms of interval names. Now, to get something clear about this numbering system, in a major scale, or a major key, as it should say, we'll get on the difference between those in a second. This would be our chords, or at least the way I would notate them using this system. And what you see is a major chord has capital letters, a minor chord has lowercase letters. Only in the case of a diminished chord do I actually put the symbol there, because otherwise you would think it's just a minor chord. In a minor key, we get the same thing. It's just the order of major and minor is different, so we start on a minor chord and then we get our diminished. So it's like we started here, and then we get major, minor, minor, major, major. Now, later on, next lesson, we're going to learn something about seventh chords. And seventh chords could be notated here as well. You don't need to, but in some cases, like here, the 4 chord is not a dominant. We'll get to what that is in a second. So if it is, I would put a dominant sign there. We'll see how that plays out next lesson. For now, you know your numbers, and you know how things are named.